Welcome to the Silent Archive. Today, we are conducting nothing less than a clinical audit of human reasoning itself. We're going to dissect the very foundation of how you think and make decisions.
And right out of the gate, we get this core principle. This one sentence establishes a hard line in the sand, the unreliability of emotion on one side, and the pure, cold power of logic on the other. It's a provocative way to start, so let's see where it takes us.
So the first step in this audit is to identify what the archive calls the primary failure of the unrefined mind. And what is it? A pathological reliance on feeling. The idea that your emotions are a compass, or that your gut instinct is whispering some secret truth. Well, here, that's rejected. Entirely.
And here's where it gets really clinical. Look at how feeling is redefined. It's not a source of wisdom. It's not a guide. It's just biological noise. It's chaotic feedback from a nervous system that's been totally overstimulated. Think of it like static on a radio. It's just interference obscuring the actual signal.
And this builds right on that last point. I mean, if feelings are just noise, then what happens when you let them guide you? You're basically letting yourself be controlled by them. The source argues this makes you a slave to your own biology, a completely different person every single time your chemistry shifts.
This is really the central challenge the archive is posing to you. It's asking you to look at your own life and see the chaos that might be coming from emotional decision-making. Is there a pattern of instability? Does your identity feel like it's shifting with every mood? It's a pretty powerful question when you really sit with it.
Okay, so let's see how this all connects into a much larger framework. This next section explores the real-world consequences of living by feeling, and it frames your limbic system not as a part of you, but as a set of chains.
So the imagery here is really crucial. A biological puppet. Anger, fear, that endless need for approval from others. These are described as the strings pulling you around. People spend all their energy just reacting, not acting. They're not the architects of their own lives. They are, and I quote, the debris of their own internal storms.
And here's where the external threat comes in. The archive points to a controlling societal system, calling it a leviathan, that actually benefits from all this emotional chaos. It needs you to be reactive and volatile because a predictable emotional population is so much easier to control. It effectively liquidates your individual sovereignty, using your own impulses against you.
So, if emotion is the problem, what on earth is the solution? Well, this brings us to the core proposal from the archive, a cold, logical framework for taking back that sovereignty. This is the end goal, algorithmic purity. Logic here isn't just an academic exercise. It's presented as the skeletal integrity of a sovereign individual. It's all about turning the chaotic world into a set of variables you can actually manage by filtering every single input through a rigid logical framework.
And of course, if you're building a system, you have to be able to measure it. So we're introduced to the systemic reasoning constant, or L sub S. Think of it as your score. It's a direct measurement of your mind's ability to choose logic over all that emotional noise. And here is the formula itself. Now, I know it looks intimidating, but really, it represents a fundamental battle happening inside your mind. The top part, the numerator, that's your power, your reason, and your clarity. The bottom part, the denominator, that's what the archive calls the predator, your emotional response and your cognitive biases.
Let's break it down real quick. Ratio and delta D clarity are your logical strength and focus. P emotion is the raw intensity of your emotional reaction, and phi bias is all about those mental shortcuts we all have. The goal is simple. Maximize the numbers on top while minimizing the ones on the bottom. Do that and you achieve what's called logical autonomy.
Okay, so that's the theory. But how do you actually raise your L sub score? This section gets into the practical, actionable steps you would need to take to reach this state of pure reason.
It all comes down to these three core protocols. First, sentiment liquidation. You literally audit your internal vocabulary. Any thought that starts with "I feel" has to be rephrased as "the data suggests." Second, syllogistic saturation. Every piece of information gets a three-step audit: premise, variable, conclusion. If it doesn't hold up, it's discarded as noise. And finally, the sovereign algorithm. You basically turn your prefrontal cortex into a cold room where thoughts aren't just trusted, they are verified.
This brings us to the end of the audit, and it's a stark choice between two possible outcomes. Based on whether you adopt this framework or not, you are either the architect or you are the slave.
And look at how clearly this lays out the two paths. The irrational slave is a victim.
consumed by the environment, living in narratives that are fed to them. They ultimately become just more feedback in the system. But the architect? They become a geometric ghost whose response to the world is a mathematical inevitability. They don't react, they calculate. They are the signal, not the noise. And this quote is the final verdict. According to the archive, choosing a life based on feelings isn't just an alternative path. It's a path of self-liquidation. It's being drowned out by biological and systemic noise before you even get a chance to start.
And so, we end where we began, with a direct challenge. This entire framework is built on a foundation of pure, cold logic. The final, lingering question is, can your own cognitive architecture withstand the audit? All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a pretty radical idea. What if you could achieve total personal freedom by silencing your emotions and running on nothing but pure, cold logic? We are about to break down a framework designed to do exactly that.
So the whole philosophy kicks off with a really challenging question. Are your emotions a compass or are they a cage? It suggests that everything you trust, your gut feelings, your passions, all of it is actually just biological noise, a weakness that keeps you trapped and predictable.
Okay, let's dive into the first big concept here, the noise of feeling. The whole argument is that your emotions are not some deep source of truth. Nope, they're a liability, a systemic weakness that external forces can and absolutely do exploit to keep you from ever seeing the architecture of your own cage.
So what exactly is this biological noise? Well, it's defined as the chaotic, high-entropy feedback of a nervous system that's just overstimulated. From this point of view, every feeling you have, anger, fear, even joy, it's just a random data spike. It's not a guide, it's a neurochemical fluctuation that makes you predictable. And because you're predictable, you're controllable.
And that leads us to this pretty stark conclusion from the source material. Most humans are biological puppets controlled by the strings of their own limbic system. You see the picture it's painting? A life spent just reacting, not acting. A life dictated by your internal chemistry instead of your own sovereign will. So what's the end result for someone who actually lives by this biological noise? The framework has a very specific and very harsh name for this condition: the irrational slave. This is what it calls the shadow of an unrefined mind.
This is such a powerful metaphor, isn't it? Imagine the captain who literally burns his maps and smashes his compass because he prefers the feeling of the wind. That's the irrational slave. This is the person who thinks living in the moment is some kind of virtue. But this philosophy argues that without a logical algorithm, living in the moment is just a clinical term for being consumed by your environment. You become a victim of what it calls perceptual liquidation.
And the framework draws this really clear line in the sand. By age 45, the irrational slave looks back and realizes they've collected a lifetime of disconnected experiences, but they've built absolutely zero meaning. There's no foundation, no signal in the noise. The architect, on the other hand, has spent that same time building a logical foundation, creating a clear, constant signal.
And this is maybe the most damning diagnosis of all. They are not architects, they are the feedback. They don't shape their own reality, they just react to it. Their entire life is just a feedback loop for the very systems that feed on their irrationality.
Okay, so if that's the problem, what's the alternative? Well, the framework proposes this incredibly rigid, almost mathematical solution, the law of systemic reasoning. This is presented as the only true framework for sovereignty.
Now, I know what you're thinking when you see this formula, but don't worry about the complex math itself. It's best to think of this as a kind of poetic science. It's a symbolic way to think about quantifying and governing your own mind. The end goal here is to achieve what the framework calls logical autonomy.
This table really breaks it down for us. It's about 4 key variables. And the goal is actually super simple, even if the formula looks complicated. You want to maximize your use of logic and your analytical focus, while at the same time you are ruthlessly minimizing your emotional responses and your own built-in cognitive biases. You're literally treating your consciousness like a system that needs to be optimized.
I love this quote. Systemic reasoning is the act of turning your prefrontal cortex into a cold room. It just perfectly captures the whole idea, right? The goal isn't to trust your gut or follow your heart. No, it's to mercilessly verify the structural integrity of every single thought before you allow it to become a part of your mental architecture.
Okay, so how do you actually do any of this? Well, the source gets very practical here.
It lays out a clear three-step system it calls the logic protocol.
So this is the path. This is the architecture of logic that's prescribed. It's how you go from being a simple reactor to becoming a processor. Step 1, sentiment liquidation. You've got to eliminate those emotional leaks. Step 2, syllogistic saturation. Filter all the data coming in. And finally, step 3, build your sovereign algorithm, a system that is totally independent of your biology.
So that first step, sentiment liquidation, it's all about an aggressive audit of your own internal monologue. You're told to hunt down every thought that starts with, I feel, or I believe, and if you can't rephrase it as, the data suggests, then it's considered a leak in your system, a vulnerability, and you have to seal it.
Next up is syllogistic saturation. This means every single bit of information you consume, whether it's a news story, something a friend tells you, anything, has to pass through this strict three-part logical filter. You check the premise, the variable, and the conclusion. If that chain of logic is broken anywhere, the whole thing gets dismissed. It's just noise.
And that brings us to the final ultimate goal, the sovereign algorithm. This is all about building a mental operating system that is so robust, so purely logical, that it works flawlessly no matter how you might feel on any given day. The source is very clear about this. Your legacy has to be a cold, self-correcting algorithm that keeps governing your signal long after, and it's a direct quote, the biological host is gone.
And all of this entire protocol, leads to a final transformation. You go from being the irrational slave to becoming what the source calls the sovereign architect. Now this is definitely not a quick fix. The framework makes it clear this is a lifelong construction project, and it culminates in total mastery around the age of 45. At that point, the individual becomes what it calls a geometric ghost, a being of pure, structured, unassailable logic. The world may scream with emotion, but your response is a mathematical inevitability. I mean, that really is the core of being the sovereign architect. Your actions are no longer pushed and pulled by external chaos or your own internal chemistry. Your response to anything becomes a calculated, precise, and, well, inevitable result of your own sovereign algorithm. And the final message leaves us with a really provocative question to chew on. In a world that just keeps getting louder and more chaotic, is the ultimate form of power a full retreat into cold, silent, perfect logic? The archive's final words are an instruction. Stay silent, stay wise. The archive is logical.